Everybody just want to take a deep breath in, just breathe out. Just feel this space. You have a really warm, loving space here in Manhattan. And I noticed that love was mentioned twice in your mission and your vision statements and this song about love. And I can really just feel that energy here today. So thank you for that. So my talk today is entitled The Power of Passivity. Now that word is a word we don't use a lot. I mean, what does that bring up for you at first? You get any feelings about that word? Like maybe there's a feeling of weakness or fragility, some negative quality we maybe associate with it. Well, I think that this word is really valuable. I think this concept is really valuable in our spiritual growth process. Because today we tend to focus so much on ego, on I know, I've got it down. I know what I'm doing here. But very few times do we really open up and become receptive and become passive to Spirit. And that's really where I believe our true power comes from, our true power. So I'm going to speak about this today. So I'm going to start about just talking about the way that currently things are. And I mentioned, we kind of have this approach where we're striving a lot in the world today. We see that. Maybe we're striving for money. Maybe we're striving for education, degrees. Maybe we're striving to move up in whatever job we may have, move up to a higher position. But whatever this is, there's usually this feeling that kind of accompanies this with, once I achieve whatever it is I'm striving for, then I'll be qualified, then I'll know. And so, as we go about this process of striving and we do achieve these things, that feeling of I know increases. And there's this feeling of, I'm the man. I got it down. I moved up to this position in my company, or I achieved this amount of money. And so that feeling of I know that the ego has begins to increase, begins to get stronger. And so, these things, education or money or leadership, these can be very wonderful things that can serve us and serve other people. But if we look at this process that we often go through in this journey, there's kind of an undercurrent or an underlying message that I feel is kind of unhealthy in the process. And that's this feeling that when I achieve that, I can love myself. When I achieve those goals, I can be worthy. I can stand in my power and I'll have true power and I will know. I will know. But if we look at this journey, we can see there's some insecurity in this process. There's some fear in this journey. And if you look, there's so many people that once they get that multi-million-dollar house in Beverly Hills, or they achieve that high position in their company, or they get their PhD, or whatever, they rise to these positions of power, there's oftentimes this deep unhappiness. You've got all this responsibility, you're the leader of the company, but what's wrong? What's unhappy? And sometimes this goes to an extreme. People we see in the media even become suicidal, after they have all of these things. And so why do I say all this? I think oftentimes, where is Spirit in this process? Where's the presence of God in this process? Where's that still small voice, that feeling of love in this outer striving and in this ego and in this I know? If we approach God this way in our meditations, we'd sit down and meditate and we'd say, all right, God, I've got 4 minutes, 32 seconds. Give me the bliss. Bring the bliss. Bring the peace. Let me feel something. And we might say, I've got a busy schedule to keep, God, hurry up. And by the way, I'm an expert in meditation, so I already know what you're going to say. So just tell me anyway. There's this feeling like that in the world, but if we don't apply this to meditation, most of us aren't going to sit down and do that in meditation, then why do we oftentimes go about in our lives applying this to our lives in this way, into the world? I think that's something we really need to ponder. So fortunately, there's a new way that's being birthed on our planet, and it's really quite beautiful. It's beautiful. There's a book called Good to Great, and the author's name is Jim Collins. You may have heard of this book. It talks about individuals who have led extremely successful companies in terms of profits and growth. And they've looked at many, many of these individuals who have led these great companies, and they've found that there are similar characteristics to these leaders. And it's interesting, there's a section entitled, Not What We Expected, which describes what they call a level 5 leader as a, quote, individual who blends extreme humility with intense personal will. So there's this, and they describe this person as almost a shy person, just kind of the opposite of what we would think of these CEOs running these big companies. There's this kind of openness, this receptivity to these leaders. And if we look throughout history, we can see that many of the great leaders throughout history, Abraham Lincoln, for instance, he was not a great speaker. He had a real thin, high voice. In those days, they didn't have microphones, and he was afraid that he wasn't going to be elected. He had this kind of inward, passive, shy presence. If you look at Gandhi, for instance, Gandhi's often pictured in a loincloth, in his farm, spinning his own, cloth. And he brought down the British Empire. One of the scenes in Gandhi that I really like was his first speech, where he's in South Africa, and he was so bad that his partner came up, took the speech away from him, and gave it for him. He was so introverted and so shy. But this man, helped lead India to its independence. So we can kind of see, we're starting to figure out, wow, what is it in these great leaders that makes them great? What is it that brings them their power? And it's this power of passivity, where they open up to a power that's even greater than themselves. I just saw a great movie not too long ago, the movie Selma. Have any of you guys seen that movie? Okay, well, I'm gonna ruin one of the scenes for you. I'm sorry. Not the whole movie, just one scene. But it kind of reflects this aspect of this open, passive, kind of modest aspect of Martin Luther King Jr., which we don't often get to see. There's scenes of him speaking with his wife. There's scenes of him in jail with his fellow civil rights activists, and his thoughts and his reflectiveness in those periods of time. And so it's really interesting how the movie portrays him. And there's one scene in general where you may recall the march in Selma. There was a violent atrocity there where the police and the highway patrol beat down the protesters. And so this made national news. And Martin Luther King Jr. was not there that day, so he flew down. He said, we're going to do this again. So he marches out, a few days later in the same exact spot where this happened, the same bridge. And they get to about midway in the bridge, and he sees the highway patrol, the police officers at the other end of the bridge. And a man gets on the megaphone and tells them to disperse, to go to the side. And so in this moment, Martin Luther King Jr. is just a little suspicious. He feels something going on here. So he stops and he kneels to pray. And there's 1,000 people behind him on the bridge, and they all, like a wave, go down. And there's this dramatic period of silence, like, what's he going to do? So Martin Luther King gets up, stands up, turns around, walks back through the crowd, and ends the march. And so later on that evening, people are upset. They're wondering, why did you end the march? Why did you go on? And he honestly couldn't give them a real straightforward answer. He said, I'd rather have you guys mad at me than have all your blood on my hands. Now, a few days later, he was taken to court, and he received a legal mandate that enabled him to take this march and to make it in peace, which is amazing if you look at the divine order of this. And so my point with all of this was, here's a guy that's done dozens of marches. He's been thrown in jail dozens of times. He's got a PhD and a reverend in front of his name. He goes out, with this intent to make the march, and he stops, and he prays, and he becomes passive and receptive. All this power is resting on his shoulders. He makes a decision that maybe goes against what everybody else was wanting. But it ends up allowing them to safely make a 4 or 5 day journey to Selma, which became one of the greatest marches in the civil rights movement, and one of his greatest speeches. So that's really the power of passivity, when we allow ourselves to stop in the face of maybe a wave of energy, a wave of momentum that the rest of the world around us is pushing us in, and really receive that guidance from God. And the way that turns out, and that's the real power that lies behind it. So passivity doesn't mean inaction. It doesn't lead to inaction. It leads to a Spirit-inspired action in our lives. So not only can we create this openness, this passiveness for ourselves, but we can create this space for other people. One of the greatest gifts that we can give another person is the gift of our listening heart. Our full presence, that alone is incredibly healing. Have any of you guys known somebody that just cycles through their story again and again? They tell you the same drama over and over. Why do you think they do that? It's really because they're not being heard in some way. They want to be heard. They want that passive space created for them. And as we do that, as we create that space, it allows things to come out of us, power and energy to come out of us that we may never have even realized was there. I'll give you an example. I took a course a few years ago, a youth and family ministry course at Unity Village, the summer of my first year. And it was filled with youth and family ministry directors from around the country. And one of these directors had a great story about her daughter. And she was on the phone, and she was talking, and her daughter came up to her, and she's like, "Mom, I want to tell you something." And she just kind of ignored her daughter, and after a while, the daughter grew more insistent, began pulling on her mom's clothing, and, "Mom, I really want to tell you something." So the woman stops, and she puts the phone down and says, "Honey, I hear you want to tell me something. I'm on the phone right now, but as soon as I get done, you can tell me." She said, "Okay." So she trotted off. And I think this is symbolic in many ways of that inner child within each one of us. Because I think all of us in some way are like that little girl saying, "Won't you please listen to me? Won't you please see the gifts that I have to offer? And won't you see the uniqueness of who I am?" And so we go into life, with that feeling. But the game has become more sophisticated now. You have to have that degree, or you have to be in that position of power, or you have to have all those years of experience before people will create that space that this mother created for her child and just said, "Yeah, tell me, share your gifts with me." So, I think people are tired of that, and I think that everyone, regardless of your age, regardless of your gender, regardless of your education, has something beautiful to say and something beautiful to contribute. And through this power of passivity, we allow that space to be created for that to come forth from other people. So, we all have gifts, and this has been one of my gifts. And over the years, I've had the chance to have really wonderful relationships, really deep friendships, and I've created this space for other people. There is an individual at my church who was an elderly woman in her mid-80s that I used to pick up and take her to a discussion group that we had. And one day, and she was just a sweet, sweet older woman. And so I created this warm space for her. She would get in the car and she'd say, "Oh, what a lovely day, and I'm so happy to go to this church here." And I would just allow her to just express who she was. And so one day we got to the parking lot at the church, and she began this story about this near-death experience that her husband had had many years before. He was on a hospital bed, and he began to see this vision. And it was this tunnel of light, like we often hear, but there were rainbows of colors around this tunnel. And there was this white light off in the distance, and that light was really communicating and emanating this feeling of love and this feeling of compassion, this feeling of understanding and hope like he had never felt before in his life. And as he neared the light, it said to him that he needed to return back to his life on earth and that he should be a good man in his life. And she ended the story, and I got the feeling like, she really hasn't told many people this story before. And after that, she shared it with our group, because I had also kind of helped to create that space with our group. And a few months later, she passed away. And I thought, wow, had I not created that space of love where she felt safe, where she felt like she could truly share this sacred experience that she had maybe not, shared with 2 or 3 other people ever, I wouldn't have heard that. I wouldn't be sharing it with you guys today. And I think that's the real power, is that when we step out of the way and create that, we get to truly see the best in other people. People that may have never, ever had a chance to get up in front of you guys like I am today and share things. We can do that for each other. So one of our unity principles, the fifth principle, says it's not enough just to know all this stuff. We've got to do it. We've got to apply it in our lives. So, how can we apply this? How can we create this space for ourselves to receive guidance from Spirit and create it for other people to express? Well, I think this one is actually kind of simple. I think I hinted on it before. Really what I try to do is when I look at people, imagine that that's the only person in the world that I'm looking at. And just tune out all the other ideas, all the other thoughts, and just give my whole presence to them. There's been counseling I've done where I've said almost nothing and just totally been present with that person. And they said afterward they felt so much better, and they came to their own discoveries, their own solutions, because I just gave them a space to express and to experience the power that was right there within them the whole time. So we can pretend like that person is the only person in the world. Listen with our full heart. There are studies of the brain today that look at multitasking. And our brain is really not designed to multitask. There's this feature called spotting that they've discovered where the brain flickers in all these random ways when we multitask. It normally flickers, but this is an accentuated version of that. And researchers estimate that 40% of our effectiveness in using our brain is decreased because of multitasking. So we are really designed to do what I just said, to fully engage people, to fully engage them. There's also a Buddhist practice, John mentioned Buddhism, that I like to use called mindfulness. And mindfulness is really just being completely present or completely aware of whatever it is we're doing. So if we're walking down the street, we're aware of every step that we take, as we feel our foot hit the pavement. Or we're aware of the sounds all around us, maybe the sounds of the birds, the smells in the air. We're fully present to life. That's mindfulness. And in that state, we begin to be fully receptive to Spirit. And in that passive state, we can be guided by Spirit. There's a scene, any of you remember the movie Karate Kid at all? There's a scene in that I love where it kind of illustrates this point of mindfulness. Mr. Miyagi is working on his bonsai tree, and Daniel comes in and says, Mr. Miyagi, what are you doing? And he's, I'm trimming the tree. So he hands him some shears and shows him how to do it. And his instructions to Daniel, he says, only thing in the world, Daniel, is just tree. Just tree. And I love that because it illustrates that sort of focus that we have to become passive and to become receptive to God. Just tree. Just John. Just Millie. Whoever I'm speaking with. The final thing I like to do is to imagine that I'm speaking to the presence of Christ as well when I look at whoever I'm looking at. And you can take this, I just invite you, take this throughout your week, this week in Manhattan. When you go to the grocery store, wherever you're at, look at the cashier as if the presence of Christ is right within them. In Unity, we believe that divine presence exists within everyone. Look at it, see it in your pet. Anything that you're looking at, imagine that, and just imagine as if you were speaking to that historic man, Jesus. That consciousness is right there within everyone. So that can really allow that space to be created. And then one more thing I would add is, do any of you have meditation practices that you do? Yeah. So, in your meditation practices, just continue with that. Whatever your technique is, that also deepens us in a way that allows us to be receptive to God. And when we continue with those meditation practices, it goes right into our day. So like Martin Luther King Jr., if you get in a jam, you don't know what to do, and you've been doing those meditation practices, you know what it means to be open to Spirit. And you know what that feels like when you get that guidance. So that comes in handy. So really just seeing people as the Christ, focusing fully on other people, doing our meditation practices, that can help us create this space. So just to conclude, I think that when we allow this to be created for ourselves, we are guided in all that we do. Our actions are spirit-inspired, and it makes us so much more harmonious in our lives with ourselves, with other people. And when we create this space for other people, it allows them to show their true colors, to show their true light, and to express things that they may never have been able to express before. To hear those stories like I heard from my congregant, or to see those skills or those talents come forth. That's the true power of passivity. So I just encourage you all this week to set aside, maybe what you think you know, what you think you know about people or situations, and just be receptive, be passive, and see how that works for you. I believe that power and that love will shine through you fully if you do that. God bless you.